All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming out again to sit through another meeting. Hopefully, this time this will be a little bit more me giving back to you instead of you giving to me, um, as we did with all the input meetings. And I've got a good bit to show you. Obviously, as you remember, I came in on Monday and got a tour from 1:30 to 3 on Monday, and then had a series of meetings from 3, and I think we wrapped up a little after 7 on Monday night. And then I was around yesterday, did a good bit of photography, gathered some video footage as well, just so you could have some additional resources to share, and then spent a lot of time digging into some of the things that you had already done. So I want to kind of go through that. I think one of the big things that I really want you all to hear from me is, as a professional who has um, worked with Main Streets all over the country, I'm going to be giving you advice today on things that you could do differently. But I want you to hear the first thing out of my mouth is you have done a really good job. Very consistent. You have some extremely professional looking materials, and you have been very consistent. But you've also been willing to adapt, and you've realized that certain messaging might not be right, and you've changed it along the way. But you have started to create some consistency in identity. So we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that, and when I say we, it's I guess the royal we, me as more than one person, but that's how we do it where I come from. So I wanted to kind of walk you through. Obviously, we had a good conversation on Monday, a little bit about the ripple effect. Once you kind of transitioned and were designated, you went through a relatively quick transition point. One of the great things that Michigan Main Street does is they have this kind of standard approach where you almost have a design crutch that you can lean on for a little while, using that look and feel of the state organization, and but then never intending that to be long term. And then from this, the first thing that you guys did was adopt this Main Street Wayne logo. Put it on shirts, made volunteer stuff, got the word out. Does anybody know who actually designed this logo?
And then my son did some tweaks to it.
Okay. So there are a couple things, there are a lot of elements going on to this, but all in all, the thing that you have here, you have what's called a badge-oriented design. So you've got your graphic design that sits on this dark color badge. It allows your logo to float very easily on top of other images, which is really good. Now, one of the first things that you all noticed as an organization is that maybe we don't want to be Main Street Wayne, but instead we want to be Wayne Main Street. So that was one of the first changes that you made.
Yeah, that was the change Josh made.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So again, what he did, and I wanna talk through this because this is what happens when you design something and then you start changing what was designed. So this is very, very typical approach. You have the name of the community, Main Street is who you are, and then this tagline. And then when you decided to make the change, you said Josh, right?
Yeah.
Josh was left with the challenge of, okay, well, Main Street's longer than Wayne, so Main Street can't enlarge as the middle element. So now all of a sudden our tagline has to go to the top instead of at the bottom, which isn't a typical way that it's designed, but it's not good or bad, it's just not typical. Now, one of the things that we did discuss here, though, is this highlights first and foremost Wayne, which when you're in the community, Main Street is actually the thing that's kind of the differentiator from other organizations. So it might not necessarily have, although it's perfectly fine the way that it is, you need some additional versatility to it. So then from there, I wanted to look at, and again, these are some of the things that Maxwell gave me. Like A plus 100% on this stuff. The things that you chose to invest in, having designed, and B, the fact that they're designed not just well, but smart. They're designed in a way where they're not going to go out of date. They're designed in a way where you're not kind of designing yourself into a lifespan corner, where you change things and have to dump the whole thing. Sponsorship opportunity, sponsorship form, everything was just really, really well done. So knowing that you have this pre-existing logo that's been around for 6 or 7 years, knowing that you've invested so much in these resources, we didn't want to completely abandon this at all. We feel like you've got a lot of good things going, but you also don't have a system. You only have a logo. Does that make sense? So the first thing that I always do is I want to explain to you a little bit about our mindset of a branding toolbox. That branding toolbox really is created of 4 main components. One is a defined color palette. So you have been blue and yellow or blue and gold, depending on how you define it. There's been some color variation in that. If you watch from the outside and see dark blue and kind of a nice, we'll call it a gold, but it's not gold. Maybe maize is a good color.
I love that
color.
Maize.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, you started real dark. When the suggestions were made to introduce and roll out a downtown logo variation, the downtown logo ended up being lighter in both tones than probably it should have. And then there was one really interesting observation that I made as well. As you guys started to roll that that downtown logo out into some of your videos, I saw where the things that were yellow started to move towards green. So you started to actually have blue and green versions in some of those videos.
That's almost white and green.
And
that was dangerous.
So I think it's one of those things where
slippery slope.
It ties into what we talked about with the lampposts. And one of the big things that we know from a physical standpoint is the lampposts really demarcate arrival into a special district. And that green, I mean, if you walk around the corner and you look at the oil lamppost right around the corner, like you have a heritage of green light posts in the community. Like that's part of who you are, and they've recently been repainted. So that's something to acknowledge from that color standpoint. The second thing is uniform typefaces. Do you know what that typeface was? Do you have it at your disposal, and how can you tie other typefaces with the primary that you had used?
Do you mean the font?
Yeah, the font.
Okay.
The third is consistent message. Consistent message, you've had a consistent message from the organization standpoint, but then, kind of played around with a couple of different variations over the time from a destination standpoint, and then finally that approach to graphics. So I want to go through these one by one. Obviously, we start with the color palette. The things on the screen are a little different than how they appear in real life. So this is kind of to help orient you. Your blue doesn't actually look black, but it does on the screen. So these are the 2 main colors that you're using now. These are pulled directly from the current logo. As I went through the community, I was trying to look at things that made sense to derive additional colors for that palette. And these really are from the theater to the light post. I mean, it just kind of made sense. So I really didn't want to overthink this, but I did expand your palette out and add 3 additional colors so that you could have more variation as you go through and communicate. So, and again, if you ever want to check, you can look over at my screen. It's just kind of a nice green that I've actually sampled directly off the light pole, a red that I sampled directly off the ticket booth, and then a blue from the sky that I on one of the pictures. I wanted, because that blue is so strong and so dark, I wanted you to have a defined lighter version so you could stay in the blue families. So that's kind of that opportunity to kind of build that palette out, and you'll see how that expanded palette works for us a little.
When you say red, that's more of like that burgundy on the front of the theater.
Yeah,
Right on the
yeah,
front.
it's definitely dark. It's definitely not like a Coca-Cola red. It's in the deeper red family. In fact, when you really look at the blue and yellow that you already used and the green and red that I'm adding, they're very firmly in a family of colors that are called jewel tones.
Jewel tone?
Yeah, so tonally they're all very similar in their own color families. So they exist together. And then that blue is a complementary, cooler blue. So it's complementary, and you can create a color connection between the blue, yellow, and light blue. And so it gives you that opportunity to kind of grow.
Did you have to tweak our existing colors
Not
to
at all.
get them into that family?
No, the two of them already had a relationship, and I just built out off of what was existing.
So you'll give us the PMS
Absolutely.
colors? Okay.
What I'm going to do is, in the style guide that I give you, I'm going to give you the defined PMSs. I'm also going to give you hex codes and what are called CMYK definitions. So it'll have one whole spread that's dedicated to color definitions,
Okay.
and it'll define all those colors so you can consistently implement those down the road. Now, in addition to that, I'm going to create and save for you logo variations of every single logo that I create in multiple color versions, and they'll all be in the same color. So you're literally going to receive a full digital resource package with all those variations. So if you ever need a one color logo that looks this way, you'll be able to have it.
Any acronyms that you just use those?
Pantone matching system is PMS.
So those are the printers.
Designer.
Yeah, that's essentially, PMS is like a paint color. It's like a paint color definition for inks.
Gotcha.
And so it's used a lot with screen printers. It used to be used a whole lot with commercial printers, but they've actually moved more towards what they call process, which is just full color printing. So PMS isn't quite as important in commercial printing as it used to be. And that's why when I give you CMYK is actually that definition to be able to consistently do the color definition. So then from there, I had to take your logo, and I'm not sure whether you guys knew what the font was that was used in the logo, but I had to deconstruct it, pull the elements out, load it up to a website, run an analysis on it, and figure out what typeface is it. You know, and it's called 20th. It used two different versions of 20th. Wayne was in 20th, what's called 20th Extra Bold, and then Main Street was in 20th Extra Bold Condensed. So what I've done is I've purchased those typeface variations for you guys, and I'm going to include those typefaces in your package. So if anyone else ever wants to take the tools and start to grow and expand it, they'll be able to have the exact same typeface. Because one of the problems is, this is what's called a sans serif typeface. When I was in school, I learned that serifs, the technical term for serifs, are doohickeys.
Oh.
That's when a thing, the doohickey that comes off the edge of a letter. So this does not have doohickeys. Sans serif without serif. And these typefaces are actually, they're really, really important, but I always like to share with folks why they're important. They are intended to be content neutral. So where other times communities, and a perfect example, can you hand me that brochure right now? Yeah. So this is a perfect example, okay? So Wayne is now presented on the top of this in a script. This happens all the time in communities. Our community's attractive, so we put it in script because it's a pretty typeface. These are content neutral. These are intended for you to be able to contribute meaning and identity into them. So they're not intended to bring personality to the table, but instead they're intended to be purely communicators. So that's why Crate and Barrel, Bloomingdale's, Jeep, American Apparel, Macy's, all use Helvetica. Was like, oh, I thought we were looking to be unique. Well, they're unique, but they're unique because they influence and they contribute to that individual identity. So I don't ever want you to think that that's a bad decision. It's a really good design decision. But the problem is if you don't have it defined, then one person's going to use Arial, then the next person's going to use Calibri, and then the next person's going to use Helvetica. And then by the end of the day, there's no consistency, and it starts to degrade that professionalism. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, the other thing that this does is having this family as your primary defined family, it opens the door up for your event extension to be able to adopt truly signature and character-driven typefaces for those events. So if you're doing an event about scarecrows, it can look creepy, where if you're doing an event, you know, that's about arts, it can be artistic. So, and I'll be able to show you how that works. So then the next thing that I got into from the typeface family is what I call a word type, okay? A word type is a really important element in being able to consistently convey the name Wayne. Part of the reason that's important is because you are the city of Wayne, Wayne downtown in Wayne County. So it can be slightly confusing. And there are certain associations that, I know we heard a lot of people talking about when you say Wayne and people just think Wayne County. We also heard people talk about, you know, are you part of the city or are you not part of the city? So there's some importance to being able to consistently communicate. Let me explain to you what we're seeing here. Up top, does anybody know what this is?
A word.
That is one of the best, yeah. So this right here is actually a photo of the Welcome to Downtown Wayne signs. This is the typeface.
That is it?
Yeah, that is the typeface derived directly out of that photo. This particular typeface, after I dug into it, it appears to be a modified version of Arial. I dug a little bit deeper just for my own knowledge, and downtown on those signs is Times New Roman. So the fact that they use Times New Roman, it does have doohickeys, exactly. It led me to believe that they were pulling off of a relatively basic typeface palette. So that's why it made sense that it was an Arial. Now, what you see at the bottom is in red. That is how you all were presenting Wayne in the old logo. And the old logo had a couple elements about it that I felt like were really funny. When you condense a name and you condense those letters, some letters condense down a lot more than others do, and it ends up creating a strange non-congruence in the word. So when you look at that outline, the black outline, that's the modified word type. That's the word type that I'm suggesting. I elongated the E. I wanted to create something that was a little bit more similar to the Wayne that you're going to see in that physical space on those gateway signs, and something that just had a little bit more weight to it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So all that said and done, at the end of the day, this is what it looks like. Now, something else that I wanted to point out, and I'm going to hop past you, Lori.
Is this what the black outline was?
This is the black outline. Yeah. Now,
The longer E.
It has a longer E. I also modified it in a different way. And this is, you can't ever change the way, like, people spell their community. So you have to deal with the name. Typefaces are really funny. Very, very rarely does a W and an A fit together. The angle on a W is actually different than the angle on an A. So I created a W from scratch so that it would perfectly align with your A. So that to the eye, it just felt right. It felt like it fit together. So now, this, it's all spaced exactly the way that it should to create symmetry. And there's some funny things that you do when you look at a word like this. You measure your horizontal space from here to here. You draw a center line. When you have a word like, a letter like Y that is so symmetric, make sure that it's dropping right down in the middle. So there was a lot of time spent on just this name. Does that make sense? It's one of those things where it's like, God, just type it out, right? But what this will do is this will give you consistency in your name. So as you start seeing things moving forward, you're going to see this used over and over again.
With you creating the W,
It doesn't get added into the typeface, but it gets solidified into all the logos. And then it becomes a graphic that you can reuse over and over again. So you're not going to be able to replicate it simply by opening up a window and typing a new thing.
that was my question.
But the big thing that we're really shooting for is that consistency in logo work and graphic design work. So that variation of it not existing in the typeface is okay. There are a lot of mechanics that you guys don't want to know about in the way that a typeface or a font works and the way it puts letters together. So that variation is completely fine. But for your word type, you do want to have a good defined word type that's consistent. So then from there, I always like to talk a little bit about brand values. The brand values here are really a combination of some of the transitional strategies that you all have defined, some of the elements that you all want to promote, activities like the events that are adding vibrancy to the community, and then I want to continue to reinforce that idea of the ripple effect, because I think that is such it's a unique way to communicate that. I have not heard that phrase before in the Main Street world. I have not heard another community that came up with that and integrated that into their messaging. And I think that you should continue to own it because it is truly different.
Dibs.
Yeah.
Dibs.
Don't even go there. Don't even go there. We're in the middle of some of that. We're in the middle of some of that issue. We don't even go there. So we'll jump back and let's start here.
So that's
Okay.
a little E.
This is the way.
Shorty.
This is the logo the way it exists now. So I want to walk through this and I want to talk about some of the things that I did here. All right. So first of all, the logo, and this actually, I'm not even telling you the truth. This actually isn't the logo as it is. This is the first variation that I made where your current logo has another white line that runs all the way around it. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is busyness. So in this logo, you have a badge. You currently have 2 different borders. You have 6 different stars, 4 different sidebars, and 4 diamonds, in addition to 3 different lines of communication.
There you go.
So-
Diamonds in the community in our
Right.
organization.
Well, absolutely. So here's what I'm going to go through a series of recommendations on ways that we can kind of tweak this out. The first thing that I did was I removed one of those outer borders because that double border the way that it was just really, really busy. Now the next thing that I did was I honed in and targeted on the stars. And as a Main Street organization, always love for our logos to be able to communicate the 4-point approach and that connection. So what I actually did was I cleaned this up and then I moved to a 4-star cluster only on the top. So I'm starting to move away from symmetry and moving into intention in our design. And then from there, I am changing up some of the emphasis. Okay, so now that I have the 4 stars across the top, it allows me to slightly move, slightly shift, and adapt kind of the way that some of these things work. And again, this is all still like adapting it the way that it existed.
Turn your screen so they can all see the color.
Yeah, it's all still the
I
same.
like that.
Yeah, it's all still the same. But by removing those yellow elements along the bottom, it allows you to then move that tagline back down to where it probably should have existed before.
Yeah,
But,
it makes more sense.
you know, as you were going through and trying to do it, it made sense that you landed where you landed. So from there, with a very simple kind of move, now you can see on the top, you see the original, and then on the bottom, you see the modified with the new word type. And the thing that is really nice about this is because of the consistency of that shape, you can transition from old to new with having zero stress about needing to replace anything you've invested in.
Oh, so you can just phase it out.
Phase it out or don't even worry about it. Like, don't actively think about replacing. Simply start to integrate in, and the transition will feel unbelievably natural. No one will ever question it. I promise you. They're not that attentive. They're just not. So then from here, once you move into something that makes a little more sense, and I do want to say, because I always like to share design concepts with folks. I think it's important to understand that design. There's a reason why when I did this, I made Wayne in yellow and Main Street in white. Does anybody want to guess why? Why is Wayne in yellow?
Because it stands out more.
We're golden.
Main Street stands
All
out.
of those are really. Do what? Say that, Maxwell?
Main Street stands
Yeah, I
out
guess
more.
it does.
Exactly. Okay. So when you have a dark background,
Oh, I see.
white is the most dramatic contrast you can create. So, and because Wayne is larger, I'm actually creating balance by making Main Street white and making Wayne yellow on a dark blue background. So it allows them to be, even though they're different sizes, it allows the weight to be a little bit more in line.
I like how you took the doohickeys off of the side stars.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it neater.
It's just extra. It's extra
Stuff.
activity that looks good when it's big and adds busyness when it shrinks. Now, next though is again, this is just an adaptation to the primary, but you need more variations of this logo. So now what I've done is I've created a series of logos that can simplify down for your size.
Maxwell's
Okay?
excited.
So as you go, you start to see different sizing that's influenced by the composition. Once we achieve a certain size of like a certain width that is our restraint, move those stars back up. You know, be able to create these different variations so that you can always have the most legible identity. And now all of a sudden, this idea of this dark blue badge starts to serve as this connector. And it allows that adaptation of the badge shape because nobody could actually point to where that badge shape was directly correlated to anything in the community. It was more inspired by the Art Deco style that we see in the theater marquee and some of those things. So it gives you that adaptation. And then once you adopt this system, you can also have this tool, which is hugely important because it didn't exist before.
Use a dark background.
Now all of a sudden, Maxwell has permission to not have everything on a dark background every time. So having that consistency of word type and consistency of approach now builds out your system. And what you're going to see as I do this, I'm going to create this, and actually the next slide kind of shows it. And again, always check back with the screen. This shows one color versions. It shows where as you start to roll this out, you can go through and you can have one color red, you can have one color blue, you can have one color yellow, and then you can even have those 4 stars represented by the 4 different colors and have them come to signify that 4-point approach. Make sense? Okay? Then from there, I wanted to also, this is a great idea that came out, was the idea of creating a logo about the ripple effect.
That's cool.
Okay? So this is almost, I don't do this often, but this is really intended like a volunteer engagement or community engagement identity, where you can have this organizational identity, but then you can also have this kind of savvy. It's almost like a logo that symbolizes being connected with your place. So it's a really cool concept. It was something that you guys came up with, and this is simply a way that you might be able to tie into that. Again, seeing those same colors, seeing that same composition. We talked a good bit about DDA, and with DDA, again, tying in to the colors, what I did here was I made DDA's primary color green.
Okay.
And I did that very, very deliberately. So that, yeah, you can't really tell, but on screen, none of it uses the dark blue. It all uses the green.
The color of the light bulb.
That's green.
It's the color of the light post.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, I know. It's hard. Sorry. I did that very deliberately. Those lamp posts are seen as civic investment. That's city. That's very municipal. So the connection between the DDA and that kind of municipal side of things, I think, makes a lot of sense. And you can just see, we did a big build with Downtown Development Authority. We did a more simplified Wayne DDA. And then we even created that bug sponsored by Wayne DDA. So you have all those different tools to tie awareness of this funding mechanism back in, but not trying to make it be too much of an organization. We want it to be more of a vehicle than perceived as, because if people think that it looks like another group, they're like, why do we have a Main Street and a DDA? And then next thing you know, they have to have a doctorate before they understand why there's these two different entities. So then from there, and this is one where I really wanted to throw some things out to you. The first thing that I always like to do is I like to go through and I like to look at some of the graphic identities of companies that have come out of the community. So there's some pretty interesting things here. Stinson Airplane Company, Graham Automobile, Garwood, Prouty and Glass. Going back to that time where you were the leading manufacturer of carriages and sleighs, like it's a kind of obscure. I mean, we were really great at making sleighs, and it's like, who doesn't have a good feeling about a sleigh? But again, tying into this, now we talked a good bit about the difference between the organization identity and the downtown brand. That was something that Jay brought up during the market analysis. Jay and he brought it up because he hears me preach on it all the time. There is an importance for there to be a graphic identity from the community or for the community that the business community can tie into. I'm doing something a little different with you guys because a lot of times I'll just design one and say this is what it needs to be. I actually want to de-emphasize the role of this. It is important that you have it. It's not necessarily that it's important that you have it right this second. You have a very interesting interim approach that ties it into the organization. It is very, very important as you continue to move forward that understanding of what the organization does and faith in the organization as it is the steward of downtown continues to grow. Because if that goes away, it doesn't matter what destination brand you have. You are at a transitional phase where you are trying to build an activity level and a density. So right now, hear me very clearly, the brand of Main Street is the most important. You got to keep pushing that. So what I did was I looked at all this stuff and I created 3 different variations that I wanted to give you just to show you 3 different approaches. Okay? So these are the 3 different things, and I'm using these kind of as graphic examples. All right? So on the far left, what you actually have is you have a version that is derived from that Graham logo, which is kind of a cool, solid. It's one of those things where it's like it's obscure. Where if you tried to like take off the Ford logo, that would be weird and odd and a no-no. If you are inspired by a Graham logo, it's a different thing. It's kind of like, oh, that's it's an interesting springboard for telling that story. In the center, obviously, it's actually, this is inspired by not the current marquee, but the marquee from the Wayne Theater.
Shape.
And then the far right is very, very contemporary. So you have one that's derived from an industrial past. You have one that's derived from a historic context of what was here. And then you have one that is truly contemporary and forward-looking. I show you all these three to tell you there is no wrong or right answer. These kind of need to play out a little bit. I would actually argue that until you get some real movement on Derby Alley and this kind of creation of place and in this kind of physical place, I don't think you need to worry about this too much right now. But these are some tools for you to keep in your pocket. And as you continue forward, you want to be able to have an identity that your business community can take and run with. And I'll show you some more on that in a second. But from there, I always like to show where the graphic identities can make their way into collateral materials. So the first and foremost, being able to have products that people can buy. I always like to show folks how they can design things that people would want. We're really good in the Main Street world at making what I call car wash t-shirts. You know? You create a t-shirt that you're only going to wear when you cut the grass or wash the car. So creating things that people actually want to wear, and something that's going to allow people to carry your name out into the community. But then also, you've done a great job at this, but this kind of shows moving forward how you could do volunteer-oriented shirts and things like that have, you know, that same kind of design. But we had somebody, we were talking about the previous shirt that you made and how giant the logo was on the front. This shows a slightly different approach to that. Now, in addition to that, overall look and feel and design, I took one of those suggested downtown logos and showed how that could kind of turn into this composition telling your story. You see this idea of feel the ripple, experience the difference.
Oh, I like that.
You have a really interesting dynamic. The ripple effect concept is one that very much resonates from an organizational standpoint. And the whole your day, your way thing that was introduced with the downtown logo, I get where that's coming from, but I feel like you have something that is unique enough that you created on your own. I wanted to explore ways that we could take the ripple effect and carry it over into the consumer side so that it became a message that was relevant to a customer more so than just a potential volunteer or community member. So this idea of feel the ripple, experience the difference, it's almost like an opportunity for us to talk about, I really feel like that phrase does two things at one time. First of all, from the context of locals, telling them that they owe it to themselves to come and see downtown and be a part of it. Even if you think you know what's down there, things are changing and you owe it to yourself to constantly reconnect. But then also one of the big things, this experience the difference, we heard a lot that you are Wayne County's small town. And this kind of connection between what role do we play? And in fact, somebody said on Monday, like, communities this size, if you get outside of the metro, we're a pretty big Main Street community. But here, we're the smallest game in town. And being able to capture that small town feel, and you know, I was telling Lee this morning, I had an opportunity yesterday to stop in the Army-Navy store. And, right, and it was...
Dusty?
Yes. Let's just say this. It was truly a small town experience. You know?
Did I sit and talk to you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, being able to go through and being able to have some ways that you can do this with a certain amount of marketing savvy. And I also want you to hear this because I think this is very, very important.
part of the reason that we split out the difference between the organizational brand and the destination brand is we hope that with these recommendations, you're not going to be talking about changing anything about your identity for the next 15 years from a organization standpoint. I think that with this system, you're going to be good and solid. From a downtown identity perspective, you need to be a lot more flexible. You need to be able to adapt things with market forces. So where marketing can change very easy, because typically that has a certain fixed lifespan and you're just paying to play. When you look at things like signage, signage needs to have a much longer lifespan. So we're not interested in tying that in. We're not interested in taking that marketing identity and dropping it into that signage, but instead looking at some of those things that we have. And what I would actually argue with this is I would argue using this as a base for signage that exists in your downtown district.
It matches in the Washington Light Post.
Right. So it all starts to fit in. But then in that world, and I want to talk through these real quick. So you've got pole-mounted gateways. Pole-mounted gateways kind of re-announce arrival. You've got some really great downtown gateways. So you understand the idea that a gateway doesn't only have to exist at your corporate boundaries. You know, they've re-announced arrival, but you can use those pole-mounted gateways to do that again, especially at significant points. Trailblazer signs are the ones that have 3 destinations on them. Some of those can be vehicular. Some of those can be pedestrian. One of the interesting and difficult challenges that you all will face is because you are 4 lanes, your Trailblazer signs for your roadway are going to be gigantic. They will have a mandatory 6-inch height letter. So these are going to be big signs because it's a big road. But that being said, they also will make a lot of difference in creating that sense of place. Parking signs, I want to award you the unbelievable honor of being the first community in 15 years to publicly acknowledge that you have no parking problem. That has literally never happened before.
That's not something to be proud of.
I know it's not. It's not. I always tell folks our goal is to create a parking problem. You have a lot of parking amenities. You have pretty well placed parking amenities, and we even talked about strategies of how you could have more parking if you were to be able to put Michigan Ave on a road diet. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Now, from there, we're investing in this and the signage. Signage intends to have about a 10-year lifespan. Banners have a much shorter lifespan. So the banners are where you might be able to have a more contemporary look and feel.
Cutting edge.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good because seeing the museum is not.
Well, it's been on for such a long time.
It has, and I will say this again, the graphic on the current banners. Thank the Lord, it's a building from here. I can't tell you how many times you roll into a community and they'll go and they'll spend the money on banners, and it's the standard. It's either the generic historic building,
Okay, hey,
or
we did that in Washington. No, not at all.
it's the leaf, snowflake, flower. It's like, oh God. So being able to have something that kind of reinforces your name, but then from there. Carrying that forward, and this is where it kind of gets fun to me, the event extension. So the first thing that I did, I took Downtown Days. Downtown Days logo did a really good job at using that badge design and using those colors. Now, the colors on it were slightly off. They were a brighter blue and a brighter yellow, so I tweaked it. And I also introduced green into it as well. So in the bottom, it's green, and then I actually made the light post green as well. An idea that came up on Monday that I'm particularly fond of, Bruce Wayne Craft Fact. Man, it is really, really dark. Again, if you can see on the screen, it's blue. It has a green hop, hops above that. But playing off of your name, exactly. That's exactly what this event.
We can sell it to the brewery.
Exactly. That is what this event is intended for. Okay, I want to be very deliberate. One of the biggest things that I noticed is you have some strategic events, but you had some openings in your event schedule.
Oh, yeah.
a craft beer festival, and actually after I had done this, I started to think about the word heroic, and I was like, is there like, can it be like a heroic beer festival, something, because that tie into Bruce Wayne I think is funny, but
If we ever get a brewery in town, you're coming to cut the ribbon.
oh, I would totally want to, yeah, but this, if your intention is only to get people together to drink, you're missing that opportunity. This event is particularly focused on inviting breweries to the community and trying to cultivate someone to set up shop here. So it's almost like the event and the interaction with the community is an unbelievably awesome byproduct of a targeted economic development effort. This is where you can use events to drive that investment. From there, I mean, you guys have this killer event with and it's funny because you say scarecrows, you say scarecrow show. Like on the website, it just says scarecrows, but then there's other places where it says scarecrow show 2017. I actually liked the simpler. I liked just Wayne scarecrows. And I put Halloween downtown. It can be autumn, it can be fall, it can be whatever. Like, we don't want it to imply that it's an event that just happens on Halloween, because it really is an invitation to come down during the season. But this is a great event. I love these. I'm surprised more communities don't do this, but I think you've done it, and you've done it really, really well. And it's a great way to create foot traffic. I hope that businesses have become smart enough to figure out how to catalyze the interest. And if not, maybe that's our next phase. Is there a way that we could teach businesses how they might be able to conduct a promotion that helps to drive some sort of scavenger hunt or some sort of this or that? It's like if a business goes and sponsors a scarecrow, is there a way that if you go and take a photo of the scarecrow with your cell phone and bring the photo in, you receive a discount or something like that? So you can start to use this not just to generate people walking around, but sending them into the businesses. And what it also does is it creates that feedback loop for the business owner, because if they're seeing people coming in, showing their phones, then all of a sudden they're starting to say, hey, this thing's working. So that might be something to consider. In addition to that, some additional events. One of the big things that we talked about was small, reoccurring events. You've got some great events, but how do we have a smaller event that teaches people to come downtown? And so what I'm suggesting is an event that might go hand in hand with the Derby Alley renovations. And I called it Arts in the Alley. It can be whatever you want it to be. This needs to be simple, okay? I gave you the example the other day of Downtown Alive in Greenville, South Carolina. It literally was a beer truck and a loudspeaker playing music off somebody's iPod. Like, that was it. It was an excuse to not go home. It was an excuse to have a beer and congregate with friends. Teaching people to come downtown. So, go through and create something that's very casual, very easy to interact with, and use an activity to activate that space that you're investing in. And then the final thing that I wanted to weigh in on was we had a lot of talk about Jazz on the Avenue. Jazz on the Avenue is a great event, but it's not great necessarily because it is jazz. It's great because there's food. It's great because there's alcohol and networking and friends and downtown location. And the jazz actually is kind of the least instrumental point of the event. In doing some research and seeing that communities like East Dearborn have an event called Jazz on the Avenue as well. Yeah, right down the road, So this is simply a suggestion. I do think that if you wanted to entertain a name change and be able to give you a little bit of flexibility so you don't feel forced to always have a jazz band every single year. Do something that's going to incorporate your name, that's going to bring your name into it. I ended up landing on Toast Wayne and brought kind of a food and kind of community connection, this kind of idea of celebrating the community together. It can be taste of, it can be flavor, it can be any of that stuff. The name, I mean, I suggested this because it was a name I had never used before, honestly. It was, taste of you can find that everywhere. You can find all those type things. But the big thing that I want to advise you on as you evaluate that event that just wrapped up, so it's fresh on everybody's mind, as you think it through, how do you transition the positive feel that people have about Jazz on the Avenue and the great time that people had at the event? How do you make sure that they know if you do change the name and all that kind of stuff? I want to make an offer to you guys because this literally is just a suggestion that's out of nowhere. As you have that discussion, if you land on an identity, just reach out and let me know, and I will create a logo for whatever you decide to do. I didn't want that decision to be made hastily because I think that you have a good event. You've just identified that it's maybe time to change the outfit of it a little. So with that, I've been talking for right at an hour. I want to open it up to you guys and see overall. Do what?
Never mind. Just talking
We were wondering about the cover for the directory, so the one that modern looking one that you showed.
The modern looking cover could be. I started to play around with it, and then I put it to the side because I didn't want to be too hasty on.
So kind of like Feel the Ripple experience.
Yeah, I mean, do you like that idea? Because if you like that concept, then I think we can. The thing that I was hesitant on is I don't want to. I think that you can actually use that composition on that cover, and you can even use that downtown Wayne graphic identity without adopting it as your logo. I think that it is designed enough, and I think that's one of the big things that we really get into. It's designed enough that it can be used without it being forced to now be used for everything. So I started to feel that out, and what I finally decided, and it was about 2 last night when I was like, okay, so am I going to do this or am I going to do that? Because the directory cover was top of mind. What I finally decided was I really want to design 2 different variations. I want to design one that's actually a little bit more Main Street centric, and then I want to design one that might be a little bit more contemporary with that downtown one. So I'll send those 2 over to Maxwell later on today while I'm on the plane.
Right, because I guess the thing too that we're looking at something. Well, one goes into the paper, so that's for the people that are here in the city mainly, right?
Right.
But then also we're trying to think more destination guide when we put it to the hotels and things like that, and that we figure that those 2 should be maybe there should be 2 different covers and also actually directories.
Right. The thing that's going to be interesting about the thing that goes in the local paper, that goes out to the local citizens, that is the kind of thing where you want it to look pretty dramatically different each and every year, because you want those locals to feel like it's new information and feel motivated to read it. Because one of the big things about locals is they're very dismissive of local orientation and information because they think they know it already. So you want to constantly have a fresh face there, where on a destination guide, you might actually be able to create something that's a little bit more static with a longer lifespan to it. So you could be a little bit more, I guess, intentional on how you create that and design it to last. All in all, do the recommendations make sense? Do you feel like it's stuff that's kind of walking it in the right direction without like completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
I love the DDA logos. Thank you very much. The one thing I wanted to share with you guys is that Maxwell and I talked about, kind of wrapping up after Jazz on the Ave. It's like probably if there would have been a good band, I could have seen more people kind of sticking around longer. And I mean, they were fantastic.
It's a work night, so they can't stay too
Well, we got moved to a Friday. So anyway, when I was in Westland, we did blues, brews, and barbecue every year, right? So one year, Mayor Wild decides we're gonna have Josh Grayson. You have no idea how stupid that was to everybody in the community that it's blues, barbecue, and oh, you're bringing a country guy in. So we locked ourselves into that word blues. The brews and barbecue are always going to be part of the event. So I like the fact that you took Wayne and incorporated that into the event, and then each year you can, keep that same identity kind of through the logo, but maybe it's a different type of music, or it's a taste fest, or it's we all know it's your signature event, but what's it going to be this year? It makes it more exciting.
Absolutely, and it could absolutely be that the genre of music that you choose for that year helps to determine and influence that year's marketing and look and feel, but you use the graphic identity to have that consistency. One of the biggest things that happens is in these events, people want the marketing for this year to look different from last year, so it ends up forcing this constant redesign of event logos, where you want to see if you can create consistency in the event logo and variation in the event marketing. But yeah, I felt like it wasn't up for me to tell you this is what the name needs to be, but the concepts of moving towards something that gives you more room to be adaptable and then also brings Wayne to the forefront. Maxwell, I know you were concerned as we talked, just making sure that it wasn't going to feel like a total rebrand as the organization's got all the things on the plate. How do you feel about the recommendations and the variations that would be given your way?
I love it. One logo that I really like in particular is like the diamond-shaped logo, but it's the softer corners.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Awesome.
Just from like a logistical kind of point of view, if like, can you provide the because you've done some specialty stuff with the Wayne? Are you able to provide that outside of the logo?
Yep.
As just maybe like a JPEG or something?
Absolutely.
Because we use like a free internet-based graphic design thing to do our stuff. So
which one are you using?
We use Canva.
Canva's great. Yeah, absolutely. What I'll actually do is not only will I save every single logo in all the different color formats, and I've got a process once I save them out, I run a script and it saves it in 5 different file formats.
So vector.
It'll save it in Adobe Illustrator, which is vector, a vector PDF, an EPS, which is vector, and then it'll save it as a JPEG and a PNG without backgrounds. Okay. So you won't have to deal with your white backgrounds on things. And I will create one of those file sets will be just the word type saved in all the different color variations. So you will literally have all those different components. Any questions or anything? I knew that I had not done the directory cover. There were a couple other things that there were a couple other merchandise that I wanted to do that I just didn't have time to Photoshop. And then I wanted to show you the idea of an event banner, but then I backed away from it a little bit because with everything that's going on, I didn't know whether we were in a place where being able to get event banners up and down in timely fashion was reasonable. So I didn't want to show it and imply that this is something that you need to be doing. It's just something that you could conceivably be doing. So I probably will design those and throw them in. I just didn't want to overstate it or spotlight.
So I think one thing that would be really, really cool, like for the DDA and for Main Street, is we cross-promote and sponsor events. If we had one specific logo that could be taken to multiple events that simply says this event, sponsored by, Wayne Downtown Development Authority or DDA, or vice versa. Say if Rotary's got their concerts going and we want to have a Main Street banner there.
Mhm.
You know, that Main Street, you know, maybe they're there volunteering or whatever.
Right.
And they have a generic banner that they can put up.
Okay.
It's not event specific, but it's organization specific, drawing
You
recognition.
talking like a pull-up banner, like an awareness type thing?
Either that or just a, you know, a 6-foot banner with grommets.
Okay. Yeah, I can throw a couple different designs that way.
Something
For
that
sure.
said like this event brought to you by.
Mhm.
And sometimes it doesn't even need to say that.
No.
Sometimes simply having
Yeah, just
a banner
with the logo.
with the logo, and maybe it says, you know, it gives, you know, the very, very briefest. But I think that's the thing that you always want to remember is, and I always tell folks, banners are a great example, because when designers design banners, you always want to look at what they're doing, because if they design a banner off of a white screen, they're going to over design the banner. If they take a photo of where the banners go and they design the banner on top of the photo, then they're going to understand how a well-designed banner is going to work in that place. Because composition has got to consider the environment in which it's going to exist. And if your banners are creating busyness instead of creating some sense of rhythm, then they're actually hurting you more than they're helping you. Another thing that's, and I don't think it's going to be an issue here, but it might. If someone decides that you want to do banners, but you need to get sponsors to be able to afford to do it. A lot of times communities will look at programs where they have sponsor banners, and they put sponsor names on the banners, or they put little things at the bottom that say sponsored by. 2 notes there. First of all, some DOTs determine and decide that
Yeah,
is...
we can't do that on Michigan Avenue.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of times they
Monroe,
determine that
I
it's they consider them billboards and or at the very least advertising. But all that aside, from a design standpoint, banners are designed differently than anything else. People always assume that top is prominent, bottom is least prominent in design. In banners, people read banners in 3 to 4 segments from the bottom up. Because as they're driving, the way a person's eyes work, they're driving and their focus is forward. So they're scanning and they're going boom, 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 boom. So if you're putting things, if you're ordering the importance of things, you want that logo down at the bottom. That's going to be the thing. That's where the repetition is going to be made. So I always design those banners where if you're designing the cover of a brochure, you want the logo up top so it's above the rack holder and it's at the top of that design. But on the banner, you want it at the bottom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the little things you learn. Any other questions? Any other things that you guys want to hear from me?
Say thank you. I mean, this is incredible.
Well, I tell you, I'm so impressed with the work that you've done, and I'm so impressed with the energy that you guys have created. If you all feel pretty comfortable with the recommendations, I always lean towards the concept of the quicker you kind of give me a green light and say, we really like where this is going, get this thing wrapped up, get it in Maxwell's hands so he's got the tools, that style guide. We can always add things to it down the road, and it just drops into that digital resource and becomes available to everyone. So, but I also don't want you to feel rushed for anything. So, obviously, I recorded this. I'm going to share this as soon as it's uploaded with Maxwell. He can share it with all you guys. And as soon as you feel pretty comfortable with it, and as soon as you feel like there aren't any major additions or revisions or anything like that, and you want to green light it, I'll get the resources prepped up. I'll get the style guide created for you all, share it with you, and then down the road, if a new event comes up, if you want to tweak something, if you've got a name change, any of that kind of stuff, just shoot us an email and we'll take care of it. It's part of the reason that, I mean, having worked with as many communities as we have come to determine that if we can continue to help you implement, then that's good for everybody involved. Because communities that implement are communities that are realizing success. So don't ever hesitate or be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to ask for help because then I'm going to get a random bill down the road. That doesn't, if I don't think that you guys are going to push that too much. We've only had one community that we had to say, look, you got to quit calling me. But that was completely and totally because the
So next Wednesday night we have our DDA meeting.
Awesome.
David, I'm sure David introduced himself as my board chair. You did?
I figured it out by context.
David Steinhardt, my board chair.
Awesome.
He's a rock star. We'll present this information at
Okay.
the DDA meeting.
I'll
so-
share a PDF of the DDA logo set directly with
Okay.
you, so you can have
Well,
a
and then I
good
think
version
we're
as
gonna
well.
wanna show some of the other how they tie
Yeah,
in,
I would
Yeah.
like to see some of the Main Street and just show them.
how
Absolutely.
it all kind of ties together.
Absolutely.
In terms of implementation and timeline, do you have recommendations for like how things should be rolled out? I know with us it's a little different because we're not fundamentally changing.
Right.
Um,
Actually, it's kind of funny. The way that you would roll this out would actually be the way that I would suggest virtually every place roll it out. It's called soft. You get the tools and you start using them, and you don't make a big deal about it, and you get the word out, you get the pieces out, and then all of a sudden, you start to have those tools. I would just say feel comfortable rolling them out as soon as you get them, because it's not a big enough change to have to think it through. It's essentially like I was saying the other day. It's like having the right tool for the right job. So now all of a sudden, when you get those links, you probably are going to have a logo that you would rather use on social media icons now because of the shape of them.
right.
Then replace them, and it's going to be a robust enough system that just use them as you need them, and that's a really great rollout strategy.
So you wouldn't recommend a press release, new look?
No, I don't think that there's any need for that here, because I think that it would probably call for more scrutiny than it even deserves. The last thing you want is a press release to trigger somebody saying, look at that Main Street organization blowing more money on redesigning a logo.
Or they changed it too much.
Right,
Or-
exactly.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is you're just kind of rolling that out, and you're just sticking with doing your job. Yeah.
I have two questions. The downtown days.
Uh-huh.
The one you showed on the screen. Is this the old one, or this is the one you tweaked?
I mean, that's the old one. Yeah.
Okay.
I know that's the new one.
You have
change
to,
the
one you have
colors.
to look on the screen because there's like
Like a
green down
Yeah.
there. The
You just
blue
can't
there.
tell because the old one, it looked exactly the same way. It was just light blue.
Yeah, so he put the different.
You just can't. It all looks black
And
there.
the established at the bottom is like a hunter green.
So should we incorporate the new font or the new script into that, or
Does anybody have a good vector version of that logo?
is that a John Racy question?
If you guys can get
Of this one?
a good vector version of that, I would love to change them out. The reason why I didn't change it out, and I'm glad you asked that question because I forgot to point it out, I didn't have that logo. So I had to pull a JPEG, and then in the program I use, Illustrator, I had to convert that into a vector form. But it's not a high enough quality that I would want you to go out and reuse it.
Okay.
So in a perfect world, you're exactly right. I would leave downtown, but I would change Wayne and I would change days into the typeface.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
No doohickeys.
And they seem like I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the angle,
It's probably more severe than it needs to be.
they look different too. Like Wayne and Days look like they're on the same angle, but downtown looks like it's slanting a different way.
That's because a script naturally slants forward while everything else is up. So when you angle something that's already angled, your eye doesn't know how to orient itself. Because it's like if this was a solid baseline, your letters are like this and a script is like this.
Yeah.
So then if you take a letter that's already tilted and then you angle it, it's
Yeah.
like, wait, what am I seeing?
Yeah, with the Wane and Days being on an
Yeah.
angle.
Yeah.
And then my other question is the ripple effect,
Right.
which I think is awesome. The one that top one there, I think.
Yep.
They're all really cool, but so how would you recommend we incorporate that with our Main Street badge? Because they're kind of two different.
I think the thing that I would really use here is I would use this in the context of volunteer recruitment, and it's almost like either volunteer or sponsorship. It's almost like this can become your campaign identity. So if you're let's say you're composing a sheet asking for volunteers, you can incorporate this look and this creating a ripple effect at the top, and then at the bottom, real small and understated, you just have that organization badge.
I love the circle because you got the 4 different colors
Mm-hmm.
and the different link splatters and the spiral in the bits.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. It's got
It's busy, but it's
busy on purpose.
Yeah.
Exactly. And there is a lot of meaning kind of built into that, and that kind of growing, and then also when you really step back, it's also kind of in the form of an eye, kind of playing into vision and being the ones that are driving that vision. So there's a lot going on in a relatively small space, but I felt like it was such a dynamic idea that it could really deal with that. So
What is the font that's used?
that is that's the same. That's the 20th condensed. It's just not the extra bold.
Okay.
And I'm going to be giving you the entire 20th family.
Okay.
So you'll have that full set.
That is the same.
It's the same typeface. It's just thinner, and it's the one. It's directly pulled from your logo. Like that literally is exactly the way the tagline appears. But once it goes big, you start to realize the condensed nature of the letters.
So the person that would end up doing the printing and everything, say they're not here, would they be able to follow along with your
Absolutely.
recommendations?
And what our goal would be is once I create.
I would hate for you to have done all this and then the person.
Oh yeah,
doing
we try to make this super easy. So essentially, what happens is all the resources go into a single folder. It'll have that style guide document that tells you how to use it, how not to use it. It'll have all the fonts. It'll have all the color definitions, have all the logos, and then all of that will be accessible through one link.
Okay.
I share that link with Maxwell and with the organization, and then you guys can feel comfortable sharing that with any vendor you want to, because it will give them full access to that.
Okay, and then be able to make sure that no rogue.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, in my 15 years of doing
I know what
this,
she means.
yeah, well,
That's a good
it's
point.
It really is.
it's
like the
it's
logo. I
funny
wanna
though.
be grabbing that.
I will say,
Yeah.
in the 15 years of doing this, we've had one issue, in 15 years, and it really didn't even have anything to do with the logo distribution. Somebody went and stole a logo off of a community website and then incorporated it into the graphics of a app because they were trying to position it as a paid visitor app, and they were trying to like siphon off money, and they didn't have permission to use it, and they didn't have permission to make it seem official. So with this primary package, I think you would feel pretty comfortable sharing it with vendors. It's not really the kind of thing, just like you said, it's not really the thing that you're going to go out and business owners aren't going to necessarily need it all that much. We might end up having a smaller folder just of some of the most relevant downtown
Like the downtown
stuff.
businesses that put
Yeah.
they want to
Right.
make sticker for their
But
window.
they don't need the DDA logo. They don't need the Main Street logo.
Yeah, and I just wouldn't want like the print professional vendor to say, I think I'm gonna do 18 instead of 20 or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just
Right.
being-
Locked in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be rude, guys, but I gotta be.
Oh, no problem.
I had to come late, and my daughter.
Thank
I
you
got
so
a
much,
meeting
Lauren.
Here, and I gotta run to City Hall before I go. So, thank you all
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
Keep up
you.
the good work. I love it. Thank
All
you.
right.
Keep
See ya.
coming.
All right.
See ya.
Hi, Lori.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Yeah, any other questions or any other final notes for me?
Great.
Well, thank you all. And